They told us it was about freedom. They told us it was about justice. They told us the colonists rose up against unjust taxes and a tyrannical king. But beneath this carefully polished story lies a darker truth, one wrapped in deception, ambition, and betrayal. Picture a world where the so-called patriots who shouted the loudest about liberty were also the largest slave owners. A world where the very men who claimed to fight for freedom simultaneously profited from human bondage. The contradiction is staggering, and it's only the beginning. The Boston Tea Party, immortalized as a bold stand against oppression, was not just about tea taxes. It was about power struggles and smuggling empires worth millions. The taxation without representation slogan, a well-crafted rallying cry. But whose voices were really heard? Look closer. Many colonial elites didn't merely want independence. They wanted control of trade routes, land, and wealth. They feared the crown would curtail their profit-making schemes. Their speeches weren't always about democracy, but about maintaining their privilege under a new flag. And then there were the people, the common folk who believed in the cause, who risked everything. Many didn't own land, couldn't vote, or were shut out from the power plays. Yet their sacrifices wrote the pages of a history that would often forget their names. So, who was really pulling the strings behind the revolution? Who orchestrated the drama while the masses played their part on the stage? The answer isn't found in textbooks or monuments. It's hidden in the shadows of power and greed. This was no simple war for freedom. It was a carefully scripted play where freedom was the mask and control was the prize. Debt and the devil. Beneath the fiery rhetoric of liberty and justice, there lurked a far more ruthless motivator: debt. The American colonies weren't simply angry at taxes. They were drowning in a sea of crippling debts, many owed to British banks and merchants. This wasn't a rebellion sparked by ideals alone. It was a desperate, last-ditch bid for financial survival. After the costly French and Indian War, the British Crown faced a staggering war debt that needed to be repaid. The colonists, once partners in empire building, were now expected to foot the bill. But the colonial elite, the merchants, landowners, and financiers, were trapped. They owed vast sums to London creditors, their fortunes tied tightly to the empire's economic web. If they continued under British rule, these debts would crush them. Bankers in London had already begun tightening the screws, demanding repayment and threatening foreclosure on ships, estates, and businesses. But what if the colonies cut ties entirely? Independence offered a way out, a chance to erase debts, rewrite contracts, and seize control of their own economic destiny. Behind closed doors, colonial leaders whispered about breaking free, not just from a king, but from the financial chains strangling them. The cry of "no taxation without representation" masked a more primal fear, losing their wealth and influence if the empire tightened its grip. In this shadow war of ledgers and loans, the revolution was not just a political battle. It was a gamble for survival against the merciless machinery of imperial finance. And in this game, the stakes were life or death for the colonial elite. The shadow of abolition. The revolution was not born from dreams of equality. In fact, one of its hidden engines was fear, the fear of freedom. Not their own, but someone else's. By the 1770s, a quiet tremor was building in the British Empire, a shift in moral winds that terrified the American South. The ruling in Somerset versus Stuart, 1772, by Lord Mansfield didn't just free one enslaved man in England, it sent shockwaves across the Atlantic. For Southern planters, it was a warning shot. The empire that once enabled their slave-driven fortunes might soon dismantle the very foundation of their wealth. And the timing couldn't have been worse. At that moment, over 1/3 of the population in South Carolina and Virginia were enslaved. Their labor was the economic engine of the colonies, producing rice, tobacco, and cotton that filled British ships and lined colonial pockets. If Parliament ever outlawed slavery in the colonies, the Southern elite would lose everything. This wasn't speculation. British abolitionist voices were growing louder. Evangelicals, reformers, even some members of Parliament were demanding a reckoning. And the Crown, weary of global unrest, was under pressure to listen. To men like Thomas Jefferson, George Mason, and Patrick Henry, who all denounced slavery on paper but profited from it in life, the warning was clear: Stay loyal to Britain and risk losing their plantations, their labor, their power, or break away and guarantee slavery's survival under a new government they could control. So behind the cries for liberty was a darker motive, a preemptive strike against abolition. The revolution wasn't just about resisting tyranny, it was about protecting a system of tyranny, one where freedom could be declared, but only for the few. The provocateurs. Revolutions are often remembered as storms of righteous anger, spontaneous and pure. But the American Revolution, it wasn't a storm. It was a script, and the Sons of Liberty were its shadowy directors. They weren't a ragtag group of rebels fighting for justice. They were propaganda masterminds, merchants and professionals who understood the power of spectacle. Men like Samuel Adams didn't just resist British rule. They manufactured outrage, manipulated the press, and pushed the colonies toward war with the precision of generals long before the first shot was fired. It started subtly, fiery pamphlets with sensational claims, secret meetings in taverns, rumors whispered in the right ears, and then came the provocations, the spontaneous uprisings that just happened to erupt in front of a crowd or near a printing press. Take the Boston Massacre. The textbook version paints a brutal image of British soldiers firing into a defenseless crowd. But the full truth? More complicated. The colonists had been baiting the soldiers for days. That night they surrounded them, taunted them, threw rocks and ice. Then someone, to this day no one knows who, shouted fire. The event was bloody, tragic, and instantly politicized. Paul Revere's engraving, distributed like wildfire, showed the British lined up in a cold-blooded execution. No mention of the mob, no hint of provocation, just a simple, powerful image designed to spark rage. It worked. What if the Sons of Liberty didn't just report on the violence, but ensured it? What if the revolution needed blood to begin and someone decided it was time to spill it? In their hands, anger became a weapon, and the people just fuel for the fire. The Smugglers' Tea Party. They called it a protest, a stand against tyranny, a patriotic act that would echo through the centuries. But the Boston Tea Party wasn't just a middle finger to the British crown. It was a mob hit orchestrated by smugglers desperate to protect a black market empire. Long before the East India Company shipped its tea to Boston Harbor, colonial merchants were already getting rich selling untaxed Dutch tea illegally. Men like John Hancock, one of the wealthiest men in New England and a proud patriot, had built his fortune on smuggling. British tax laws, bad for business, legal tea imports, even worse. So when Parliament passed the Tea Act of 1773, allowing the East India Company to sell directly to the colonies at a lower price, cutting out colonial middlemen and smugglers altogether, it wasn't just an economic policy. It was a declaration of war on colonial profiteers. Hancock, Samuel Adams, and others saw the writing on the wall. If the British tea succeeded, their empire of smuggling would collapse. Their solution? Spark outrage. Twist the narrative. Make it about freedom, not financial self-preservation. And so, on a cold December night, men disguised as Mohawk warriors boarded the ships and dumped 92,000 pounds of tea into Boston Harbor. But this wasn't random chaos. It was targeted economic sabotage. Not a single crate of Dutch tea was touched. No ship owned by patriotic smugglers was harmed. This wasn't rebellion. It was a protection racket dressed in revolution's clothing. And the colonists? They drank it up, along with the story they were sold. Franklin's fall from grace. Benjamin Franklin, founding father, inventor, philosopher, and once a loyal servant of the British Empire. He wore silk coats, sat in royal courts, and rubbed shoulders with the most powerful men in London. For years, Franklin wasn't dreaming of a revolution. He was working tirelessly to preserve the union between Britain and the colonies. But power has a price, and loyalty in the wrong empire gets you burned. In 1774, Franklin was summoned before the Privy Council in London. The charge? Leaking private letters from Massachusetts' royal governor that exposed colonial manipulation and called for harsher crackdowns on dissenters. Franklin didn't write the letters. He didn't forge them. He simply handed them over. believing the truth would help bridge the growing divide. He was wrong. What followed was a public shaming unlike anything in his life. In a packed chamber, Solicitor General Alexander Wedderburn ripped Franklin to pieces. He called him a thief, a traitor, a liar. The crowd jeered. His friends looked away. The man who once dreamed of uniting the empire left that room humiliated and alone. Something snapped that day. The loyal diplomat died, and in his place, a new Benjamin Franklin was born. One who would return to America, not as a peacemaker, but as a revolutionary. He would go on to charm the French into war, write biting satirical essays against the crown, and help draft the very documents that declared Britain the enemy. But was it justice or revenge? Did Franklin turn against the empire for the sake of freedom? Or because the empire turned against him first? In the end, it wasn't a gunshot that radicalized Benjamin Franklin. It was a courtroom full of laughter and betrayal. The land grab. They didn't fight for freedom, they fought for land. To understand the true motive behind the revolution, you must look west, not toward the redcoats marching in Boston, but toward the vast, unspoiled wilderness beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Forests, rivers, mountains, and the promise of untapped wealth. This was not empty land. It belonged to indigenous nations, the Shawnee, the Cherokee, the Iroquois. For generations, they had lived, traded, and warred on the soil. But to men like George Washington, it was something else entirely, a golden horizon waiting to be carved into plots, surveyed, sold, and owned. Washington wasn't just a general. He was a land speculator, one of the largest in the colonies. He had secret claims to tens of thousands of acres in the Ohio Valley, acquired through shady deals, disputed charters, and military favors. And he wasn't alone. Other elites, Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, were all tied to the same dream, Western expansion. But then came the Proclamation of 1763, a royal decree from the British Crown that slammed the brakes on their ambitions. In the wake of the French and Indian War, King George III forbade colonial settlement west of the Appalachians. His goal? To avoid another brutal war with native tribes. To the British, it was diplomacy. To the colonists, it was betrayal, because that land was supposed to be their reward. They had bled for it, they had fought for it, and now the king was locking it away behind a legal wall. To the average farmer, it was frustrating. To the colonial elite, it was unforgivable. The seeds of revolution were sown not just in the streets of Boston, but in the land deeds locked in drawers, the maps marked in secrecy, and the bank loans waiting to be repaid with frontier gold. Independence meant war, but war meant the proclamation would be torn to pieces. It meant the land could finally be taken, by force if necessary. In the end, the call for liberty masked another conquest, not from a tyrant king, but from the nations who already lived on the land the revolutionaries planned to steal. The king's last offer. The war that reshaped the world almost never happened. In the months before Lexington and Concord, there was a narrow, flickering window where peace still lived, bleeding, barely breathing, but alive. And the British were willing to make a deal. Behind the scenes, the crown was panicking. They had misjudged the mood in the colonies. Parliament had thought a show of force would calm the unrest. Instead, tensions exploded. Riots, boycotts, militia groups drilling in forests. So Britain extended an olive branch. A proposal was sent across the Atlantic. Lower taxes, partial colonial self-governance, a seat at the imperial table. Not independence, but the closest thing to it without breaking the empire. Some colonial leaders, including John Dickinson and moderates in the Continental Congress, believed this was the way forward. No blood, no war, just a reshuffling of power within the empire. They urged caution, dialogue, time. But others, they smelled opportunity. War wasn't their last resort, it was their plan. Because war would wipe the debts. War would erase contracts signed with the crown. War would open up native lands long restricted by British treaties. And in the chaos, new nations could be built by the hands of the powerful, unchecked by kings or laws. So while the British made their offer, certain firebrands quietly ensured it would never be accepted. Letters were intercepted. Compromises were delayed. Negotiations were buried in committees. Then came the final act. April 1775. Shots fired in the dark. Smoke over Lexington. Blood spilled on Concord Bridge. Who fired first? We still don't know. But some believe they did know and had been waiting for it, maybe even provoking it, because peace would have meant shared power. But war meant total control if you could win it. So the king's last offer faded into history, drowned out by the sound of muskets and the ambitions of men who never wanted peace in the first place. The secret war within. Not all Americans wanted independence, and for those who didn't, the price was exile, terror, or death. The American Revolution was never just a war against Britain. It was a war within, a brutal, unforgiving civil conflict that tore towns, churches, and families apart. 1/3 of the population, nearly 1 million people, remained loyal to the crown. Many of them believed in law and order, in peaceful reform over violent rebellion. They called themselves loyalists. But to the revolutionaries, they were traitors, and traitors had to be punished. Men were dragged from their homes in the middle of the night, tarred and feathered, their businesses burned. Women were publicly shamed, their families harassed. Children were beaten in the streets. Entire communities, Quakers, Anglicans, Caribbean merchants, even freed black families, were targeted for refusing to join the patriotic frenzy. It didn't matter if you were peaceful. It didn't matter if you had doubts. If you didn't choose a side, their side, you were branded the enemy. In cities like New York and Charleston, loyalist homes were confiscated, their land auctioned off to fund the war effort. The revolutionaries got rich, off the ruins of those who wouldn't join them. Some loyalists fled to Canada, others to Britain. Some vanished into the wilderness, hunted and hated, their names scratched from the pages of American history. But many never left. They stayed, silenced, watched the flags rise, watched the statues go up, and lived in a country that would celebrate freedom while erasing anyone who questioned how it came to be. This was the revolution they never show in paintings, not redcoats and rebels in formation, but neighbor against neighbor. Whispers in the church pews, fires in the dark. A war not just for power, but for the right to define who truly belonged. The firebrands and the fortune seekers. Every war has its patriots, but every war also has its profiteers. The American Revolution produced heroes who cried for liberty, marched into gunfire, and risked it all. But lurking behind them, just out of sight, were the men who never fired a shot and still walked away richer than kings. Take Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. A thunderous orator, a symbol of resistance. But behind the podium, he was deeply entangled with land speculation and wartime contracts. His speeches stirred the masses, while his allies signed lucrative deals behind closed doors. And he wasn't alone. The revolution became a gold rush in disguise. Contractors supplied the army, often at inflated prices. Speculators bought seized loyalist land for pennies and sold it for fortunes. Merchants smuggled around blockades, trading with the enemy when it suited them. Some even sold defective weapons, spoiled food, and counterfeit uniforms to the Continental Army. Men died in freezing tents, barefoot in Valley Forge. Meanwhile, war financiers in Philadelphia bought mansions and drank wine by the fire. A new elite emerged, not born of bloodlines, but from wartime opportunity. They made their fortunes not just by surviving the war, but by prolonging it. After all, peace meant audits. Peace meant scrutiny. But as long as the drums of war pounded, the cash flowed and the revolution rolled on. So ask yourself, how many believed in liberty and how many believed in leverage? Behind every cannonball and battlefield hero was a man in a counting house, tallying the cost of freedom and turning a profit. The Forgotten Clause. All men are created equal. It's the line etched into marble, memorized in schools, held up as the moral heartbeat of a nation. But in 1776, those words were soaked in contradiction, because while Thomas Jefferson wrote them, he did so from a Virginia estate powered by over 600 enslaved people. Humans who would never taste the freedom he claimed to declare. And here's what they don't teach you. The original draft of the Declaration of Independence did include a clause condemning slavery. Jefferson wrote of the cruel war against human nature itself, blaming King George III for allowing the transatlantic slave trade to continue. It was bold. It was damning. It was the one moment the revolution could have stood for true universal liberty. But then the Southern delegates read it. Planters from South Carolina and Georgia exploded in outrage. Even Northern merchants, who had grown wealthy on slave-produced goods in the slave trade itself, grew nervous. That clause, they said, had to go, or the South would walk. And so in a dimly lit hall in Philadelphia, the lines were struck out, the ink dried, and the hypocrisy became law. They kept the poetry, but cut the truth. The final document kept the promise of equality, but only for white landowning men. Enslaved Africans remained property. Indigenous people were branded merciless savages. Women were invisible. The poor were ignored. It was never meant to be a revolution for all. It was a contract between elites, a declaration of independence from monarchy, but not from oppression. And the clause that could have changed everything, buried, forgotten, burned by compromise. Betrayal at the ballot. The war ended. The redcoats sailed home. And in the silence that followed, America faced a question far more dangerous than any British musket. Now that the people had bled for liberty, would they actually be allowed to use it? The answer came swiftly, and it wasn't freedom. It was property, class, control. The Constitution, hailed as a sacred blueprint for democracy, was in fact written by a narrow circle of white, male, wealthy landowners. There were no women in the room, no black men, no poor farmers, no indigenous voices. Only those who had the wealth to hold power and the will to protect it. The new government allowed voting, but only for propertied men. In many states, you had to own land to cast a ballot. In some, you had to pay a tax just to vote. The same working-class militiamen who died at Bunker Hill, who marched barefoot through snow, were now told, "You fought for democracy, but you can't participate in it." Women who had organized protests, boycotted goods, and risked their lives as spies were cast aside. Their names erased, their voices silenced for generations. And the enslaved? Still shackled, still traded, still written off in the Constitution as 3/5 of a person. Not to grant them rights, but to give slaveholders more votes in Congress. Even poor white men, those without land or titles, were seen as a threat. When they demanded more say in government, more economic fairness, they were branded mobs, rebels, anarchists. This wasn't a birth of freedom. It was a rebranding of aristocracy. The monarchy had been overthrown, but a new ruling class simply stepped into its place, cloaked in liberty, protected by parchment, and surrounded by the illusion of choice. In the end, the revolution didn't open the gates. It built new walls. The Loyalists' Curse. In the story of the American Revolution, the victors write the history, and the Loyalists, the men and women who stayed true to the crown, were written out. They believed in the empire, in order, in law. They weren't traitors to their neighbors. They were patriots to their own vision of justice. But the revolution saw them as enemies, and their loyalty became a curse. Loyalist families suffered unspeakable horrors. Homes were torched in midnight raids. Farms were seized and sold at auction, often to those who had once been their friends. Names were blackened in town records, businesses boycotted or destroyed. Entire communities, Anglicans, merchants, African Americans who remained loyal, were driven from their homes. They were branded traitors, not just in pamphlets or speeches, but in real life, with tar and feathers, prison cells, and exile. Many fled north to Canada, seeking refuge in British-held territories, only to face the pain of displacement and the loss of everything they had known. Others sailed back to England, strangers in a land they had never called home. For those who stayed, life was a daily torment. Families divided by politics, friends turned enemies. The revolution's freedom became a prison of suspicion and hatred. And when the war ended, the promise of new beginnings didn't extend to them. Their land was gone, their voices silenced, their stories erased. The Loyalists were the forgotten casualties of a war that celebrated liberty, but punished loyalty. History remembers the patriots, but behind the flag, shadows linger, of those who paid the ultimate price for refusing to join a revolution they never asked for. Rewriting the revolution. History is not written by the victors alone. It is rewritten by their heirs. Generations after the guns fell silent, the messy, brutal truth of the American Revolution began to fade, softened and polished like an old family portrait hung on a parlor wall. The inconvenient stories of greed, betrayal, and oppression were quietly erased or reshaped into tales of noble heroes and clear-cut justice. Textbooks were rewritten, monuments were erected. Schools taught a simplified story where the colonists were brave underdogs, the British tyrants, and freedom was the shining prize. But behind this carefully curated mythology was a deliberate cover-up. The elites who had orchestrated the revolution wanted to protect their legacy and their power. They told a story the world wanted to hear, a story of democracy born from tyranny, unity born from chaos, and liberty won against all odds. The truth? It was more complicated and darker. The revolution was never truly about the people. It was about power. It was about wealth. It was about control over land, labor, and law. Generations learned to love a fairy tale, never questioning who wrote the script or why the inconvenient chapters were left out. The silenced loyalists, the enslaved, the women, the poor, all were ghosts in a history book that celebrated only the victorious few. And so the revolution lives on, an ideal shaped by selective memory, myth, and political convenience. Because sometimes the greatest power lies not in the sword, but in the pen. The final twist. The revolution was never over. They didn't fight for freedom. They fought for control. And that control, they still have it. When the last musket was fired, the flags were raised, and the treaties signed, the war ended only on paper. The system of power, the system of privilege, remained firmly in the hands of the elite. The very men who scripted the revolution took their seats at the new tables of government, protecting their wealth, their land, and their influence. The poor continued to struggle. Slavery didn't vanish. It expanded for decades. Women remained voiceless in politics. Indigenous nations were pushed further west, their lands stolen bit by bit. The American Revolution wasn't a clean break. It was a passing of the torch. Generations since have fought their own battles against segregation, inequality, disenfranchisement, against corporate power, systemic racism, and political corruption. The promises of liberty and justice remain unfulfilled for many. And yet, each new generation is taught to love the revolution, to see it as the ultimate victory of freedom, without the scars and the sacrifices buried beneath its shining veneer. But history tells a different story. The revolution wasn't stolen. It was scripted, and the script is still being written. So when you hear the words freedom and revolution, remember, they fought for control, they won the war, and they never really let go.